Axel von Fersen was born in September 1755 and belonged to one of Sweden's then mightiest families, von Fersen. A family actively involved in the political affairs of Sweden. We don't know much of his earlier life, but at the age of 14, Fersen was sent out on a grand tour of Europe. This tour, that every young aristocrat of the time should undertake, encompassing studies at prestigious universities and military academies, and Fersen's educational agenda was nothing short of ambitious. He was to learn German, Italian, and English. He was already proficient in French and Latin. Then he would learn the art of war, such as fortification, then mathematics and history. But it wasn't just about academics. Fersen also needed to familiarize himself with the latest dance moves for the saloons, learn court etiquette, and make connections at various royal courts across Europe. Socializing with royalty was second nature to Fersen, having been raised in an environment where it was a way of life. The first day of Fersen's journey, he started to write a diary. This became a lifelong habit for Fersen, beginning at the age of 14 and spanning over 20,000 preserved pages now housed in the Swedish National Archives. In addition to this diary, he carefully maintained a register of all the letters he wrote and received, providing us with invaluable insights into his experiences. Descriptions from various accounts and memoirs of the time paints a vivid picture of Fersen's physical appearance and character. He was often described as beautiful, with dark and intense eyes. Furthermore, Fersen's enemies often claimed he exuded an air of coldness and arrogance. Perhaps there was some truth to their claims. He studied at various schools around Europe, one of them being in Brunswick. During his time there, Fersen helped the princes of the Swedish royal family in various ways, which earned him 2 promotions within the Swedish military, first to corporal and later to a member of the Royal Guard. Fersen also spent some time in Geneva, where he met Voltaire, who was nearly 80 years old at the time. Interestingly, Fersen chose to mention only the physical appearance of Voltaire in his diary, leaving out any details about the philosopher's words or ideas. Voltaire's attire, described vividly by Fersen, included a red vest, adorned buttonholes, wool socks, an old wig, shoes of an ancient style, pants, and a morning robe to complete the ensemble. After spending another 6 months traveling, Fersen, now at the age of 17, had earned the rank of lieutenant at Smålands cavalry. He was now fluent in German, Italian, and several other languages. Now, finally, the moment had come. He could at last travel to the one place he had longed for during those formative years from 14 to 17. Paris. In the fall of 1773, Fersen arrived in Paris. Now 18 years old, Fersen settled into the luxurious Hotel de York on Rue de Colombier. Through his Swedish connections in Paris, Fersen was introduced to the French court, where he met the King Louis XV and his mistress Madame du Barry. He frequented the saloons of the era, attending gatherings hosted by influential figures such as Madame de Deffont, even though he admitted in his diary that he often felt immensely bored. Yet amidst the occasional tedium and his continued education, Fersen found solace and delight in the world of ballet and opera, which captured his heart like nothing else. Fersen had spent a few weeks in Paris, eagerly participating in the social events, giving him a chance to meet people of the French high society. On the 17th of January, 1774, Fersen attended a ball hosted by Marie Antoinette at Versailles. Little did he know that this initial meeting, merely formal introductions, would be the start of a life-altering connection. Their paths crossed again on the 30th of January at another ball, but this time Marie Antoinette concealed her identity behind a mask. It wasn't until someone called her name that Fersen realized he had spent over 30 minutes conversing with the future Queen of France, and from there, their meetings would grow only more frequent. Axel was well received in France. The Swedish ambassador of the time wrote to the Swedish king Gustav III the following: "Of all the Swedes who have been here in my time, he is the one who has been the most welcome by the great world. The royal family have treated him remarkably well. It is not possible to have shown a more discreet and becoming conduct that he has maintained. With the handsomest face and much intelligence, he could not fail to succeed in society, and he has done so completely." In May 1774, the French monarchy witnessed a significant transition. Louis XV passed away, and Louis XVI ascended to the throne, with Marie Antoinette becoming the Queen of France. Fashion then needed to move on to the next stop of his education, London. In England, Fashion aimed mainly to learn English. Just as in Paris, his time in London would be a blend of study, encounters with the royal family, and introductions to King George III. But in the end, Fashion was not fond of London. He found the food distasteful and the beer undrinkable. The English society, both men and women, differed greatly from what he had grown accustomed to in Paris. The theatres failed to impress, and he initially disliked the English fashion sense. Nevertheless, as time went on, he found practicality and comfort in their style. The architecture and well-maintained roads did leave a positive impression on him. Fashion bid farewell to London and traveled through France back home. After 4 long years, his studies were now complete. Fashion now returned to his home country, where he found solace in the Swedish court, which was modeled after the French court. During his time in Sweden, Fashion thrived amidst the cultural ambience and was also promoted to captain of the Light Dragoons. Fashion also formed a deeper bond with his sister Sophie. She became his confidant, the one person he trusted implicitly, to whom he shared everything. As Fashion turned 22, his father believed it was time for him to marry. So, in April 1778, Fashion was sent to London again, with hopes of arranging a marriage. However, upon his arrival in London, Fashion's marriage proposal was met with rejection. In the summer of 1778, Fashion returned to Paris yet again and was presented at Versailles. Pleased to see him once more, Marie Antoinette recognized Fashion straight away and uttered, "Oh, now here's an old acquaintance." The room was abuzz with whispers, as they wondered who this young man was. Marie Antoinette was already pregnant at this time, in her 5th month, yet she remained the same cheerful and outgoing person. Fashion wrote to his father, proclaiming her as the most beautiful and lovable person among all the royals he knew. It was clear that the Queen had formed a favorable impression of Fashion, and she was keen on introducing him to her circle of friends. The Queen had even inquired with the Swedish ambassador about Fashion's absence from one of her Sunday card-playing gatherings. The Queen bestowed an unusual amount of attention upon Fashion. Axel wrote to his father to say, "The Queen treats me with great kindness. I often pay her my court at her card games. As someone had told her of my Swedish uniform, she expressed a wish to see me in it. I am to go this Thursday thus dressed, not to court, but to the Queen's apartments. She is the most amiable princess that I know." Fashion even started to join the Queen in her retreats to the Trianon, indulging in the beauty of nature and partaking in picnics and disguising themselves as farmers and maids, immersing themselves in a rustic experience. Yet, beyond the splendor of the gardens, the rumblings of a political explosion grew louder. In December, a daughter was born to the royal family, named Marie-Thérèse, or known as Madame Royale. After a month of recovery, life returned to normal, and the guests once again spent time at the farm in the Trianon Gardens. Fashion and the Queen's close encounters starting fueling rumors. They were seen together everywhere, at the opera, in the Trianon Gardens, and they met several times a week. Fearing the tarnishing of the Queen's reputation, Fashion chose to step back from court life. The growing gossip prompted him to distance himself from Marie Antoinette. At this time, the American Revolution was unfolding, with France providing support to the United States. France decided to send an expeditionary force to aid the American cause. Fashion saw this as an opportunity to gain real military experience and escape the court gossip. He became the adjutant to General Rochambeau, the commander of one of the French expeditionary forces. Due to his proficiency in English, Fersen also served as the general's personal translator. In the spring of 1780, at the age of 24, Fersen set sail from France. It's said that the Queen's eyes could not leave him during the last days, and they often filled with tears. After a long voyage, they reached the shores of America in July, anchoring at Rhode Island. During his time in America, Fersen had the honor of meeting General Washington. Fersen described Washington as possessing a strikingly beautiful face, radiating both strength and integrity. Though reserved in nature, his words carried the weight of wisdom and courtesy. There was a hint of melancholy in his eyes, adding to his captivating allure. Fersen actively participated in the war effort, joining the besiegement of Yorktown and fought valiantly. Throughout his service, Fersen played a pivotal role in fostering the alliance between the French and American forces. He attended every meeting between the French command and George Washington, and for his service, he was later awarded the Cincinnatus Order. But Fersen's time in America served a dual purpose. He had embarked on a mission from Gustav III, the King of Sweden, to gather information about the American colonies. His travel across the vast continent revealed stark differences between the northern and the southern colonies, foreshadowing potential conflicts in the future. After 3 years, in June 1783, Fersen returned to France. Fersen's absence from France had not diminished his popularity. He was received with open arms, celebrated for his accomplishments. The day he returned to Versailles, it's said that Marie Antoinette was entertaining playing her harp when Fersen entered the room. When she saw the young count in his new uniform and medals, she stopped playing. This caused everyone in the room to turn to watch this young man. Fersen and Marie Antoinette began their relationship anew. Fersen was also now promoted to colonel in the Swedish and the French armies by respective monarch. He also thought it was time for him to have his own regiment. Appealing to his father for funds and with the Queen's assistance, Fersen managed to acquire the Royal Suédois, the Royal Swedish Regiment, for a staggering sum of 100,000 livres. The Queen and Fersen's connection grew stronger, as evident in Fersen's letter to his sister Sophie, expressing his reluctance to marry anyone else. I trust that no one will try to find another bride for me. I have made up my mind never to marry another. I cannot give myself to the only woman I desire, to the only woman who really loves me. Therefore, I will give myself to no one. During this period, Fersen found a semblance of peace in his life. He remained close to his beloved queen, held a prominent social position, and commanded his own regiment. Yet destiny beckoned once more. Summoned by Gustav III, Fersen embarked on a 7-month journey through Europe, leaving Paris behind, although maintaining a constant correspondence with the Queen, pouring his heart out in letters addressed to Josephine, an envoy entrusted with delivering his messages. Over the course of 1783, Fersen wrote a total of 34 letters, capturing the depths of his feelings and devotion. Fersen later returned to Paris together with the royal Swedish entourage, where the two royal houses engaged in feasts and private conversation. Fersen, however, lamented the lack of spare moments, as the restless king remained in constant motion. Nevertheless, Gustav's visit bore fruit, with Sweden securing further funding from France and gaining a new colony, Saint Barth. One of the last feasts were held in Trianon. The party was held in the evening and night, with the whole park lit by all the light for the special occasion. As the night unfolded, the guests could be transported by boats to an illuminated island, adorned with a temple of love. It has been described as enchanting, leaving an indelible mark on all those present. 9 months later, on March 27, 1785, the Queen gave birth to a son, Louis Charles, who received the title Duke of Normandy, not held since medieval times, and maybe there was a reason the child became Duke of the province of Vikings. Coincidentally, at the same time, Fersen received the Order of Military Merit and the Royal Order of St. Louis, the reason for which remain unknown. Louis XVI wrote in his diary that on the day the prince was born, he said the following: "Exactly like it was when my son was born." Fashion returned to Sweden in 1784 with Gustav III and remained there. His stay was marked by his dissatisfaction. However, his attention remained fixed on Marie Antoinette, whom he wished to introduce to his sister. In a gesture of affection, Marie Antoinette sent Sophie a lock of her hair, a gift that deeply touched both Sophie and Fashion. At this time, the Queen's connection to the von Fashion family seemed stronger than ever. The Queen later in life gave birth to a daughter named Sophie, a name uncommon in the French royal family. As the years passed, Fashion and Marie Antoinette's lives remained intertwined, their devotion to each other never faltering. However, the storm brewing in France threatened to shatter their idyllic world, as the tides of revolution loomed on the horizon. The French political situation took a turn for the worse as the economy plummeted into a deep crisis. Rumors of a war with Prussia, new taxes, and the convening of the Estates General, which hadn't happened in centuries, began to circulate. Count Fashion, who after a few months in Sweden had returned to France, regularly traveled between his regiment at Valenciennes and Versailles, noticed a change in the Queen's behavior due to the prevailing political climate. The Queen and Fashion began to meet more frequently, often discreetly, away from the public eye. These secretive encounters only fueled further gossip about the Queen's actions. In this politically charged atmosphere, the Queen grew increasingly isolated, and Fashion stood steadfastly by her side. He yet again confided in his sister, expressing his deep concern for the Queen's unhappiness, wishing he could bring her the happiness she deserved. Just when things seemed tumultuous enough, Fashion received a summons to return to Sweden. Gustav III required his services as a colonel for the war against Russia in 1788. Fashion arrived in Finland and joined the war effort. However, he didn't stay to see the war through. The situation in France was becoming increasingly unstable by the day, and Gustav III wanted first-hand reports. Thus, Fashion was sent back to France, arriving in November 1788. As 1789 dawned, both Fashion and Marie Antoinette were 33 years old, having known each other for 15 years. Little did they know that the political, social, and economic turmoil brewing within France would soon ignite a revolution. At that time, they saw it more as a question of order and morality, not realizing the profound implication it would have. As the Estates General convened, Fashions attended its first meeting along with other diplomats. He compared the discussions to the English parliamentary system. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince tragically passed away, making the Duke of Normandy the new heir apparent. On July 14th, 1791, the revolution murmurs had turned into earthquakes. The Bastille was attacked by a furious mob. Chaos erupted in France, with many of the nobility fleeing France. The newly formed National Assembly declared human rights, stripping the nobility of their privileges. All this happened within a few weeks in 1789. Fashion, still stationed at Valenciennes, was anxiously following the events and described France as a kingdom without law, where military discipline had vanished. Riots are taking place in all the cities of the kingdom. Fashion was asked to go to Versailles, where the safety of the king and queen was threatened. Many of the army officers had deserted by then, so his presence was needed there. Fashion and Marie Antoinette's correspondence increased, but their words were no longer filled with love. Fearful of interception, they carefully chose their words. Fashion moved away from his regiment and closer to Versailles, finding ways to be near the queen. In October, the women of Paris, and soon followed by Lafayette and the National Guard, marched towards Versailles. The women and the National Guard succeeded in forcing the royal family to relocate to Paris. Fashion remained by the royal family's side, as close to the queen as he could be, and protecting her and the royal family. The royal family moved into the Tuileries Palace, bidding farewell to Versailles forever. Though France was still a monarchy, and the king remained the head of the state, the court now operated differently. The royal guards were replaced by the National Guard, led by Lafayette. The palace became a prison in all but name. Each member of the royal family was allocated their own apartments within the palace, connected by a network of hidden passages. Suspicion lingered in the air, and trust was scarce. Fashion was appointed as Gustav I's personal liaison to the French royal family because the king didn't trust the Swedish ambassadors who had revolutionary sympathies. Fashion's father wrote several letters expressing his worries for his son, asking him why he didn't leave. Fashion only answered, "I am bound to the king and queen. Therefore, I am beholden by the kindness they showed me during the height of their power, and I would be an ungrateful scoundrel if I abandon them now when they can do nothing to help me, while I still can be useful to them." He became their secretary and their trusted friend who advised them and wrote letters on their behalf. He was the link between the Tuileries and the outside world. Fashion continued his life in Paris, attending salons and parties while engaging in new love affairs. Fashion remained fixated on saving the queen and the royal family from their prison. A plan now formed to get the royal family out of Paris and move them to the eastern border, where loyal troops were stationed. Fashion's obsession with the royal escape left its mark. He met with people, planned, schemed, and visited various locations, all connected to his mission of saving Marie Antoinette and the royal family. By March 1791, the king realized that the political situation was extremely difficult and asked Fashion for his opinion on the matter. Fashion presented his views, judging that the king had two options. The king chose the second one, to leave Paris, with the intention to deliver a proclamation to the country once he reached a place of safety. In the fall, pressure mounted. The royals were held responsible for various civil unrests in France, becoming frequent targets in the newspapers. Society grew increasingly radical, and the royal family realized that escape was their only option. But how could they manage such a risky operation with the castle under guard and hostile Paris waiting outside? Fashion required the utmost secrecy. If the plan, or even a hint of it, leaked, not only Fashion's life but also the lives of the royal family would be at stake. Fashion and Marie Antoinette corresponded with ambassadors and politicians, using secret codes and invisible ink. Every message had to be smuggled out of the palace. Fashion, as an official representative of the Swedish king, could still visit the royal family, sometimes personally receiving the letters. Fashion personally financed the planning and expenses for the escape. The royal family had little cash, so he borrowed money from everyone he knew. He even secured passports from the Russian ambassador. The Russian Baroness von Korff provided the carriage for the royal family, ordering a large one to accommodate 6 people, complete with mattresses, kitchens and toilets. Given her foreign status, her actions aroused no suspicion. Fashion worked together with General de Bouillé to ensure full support of his troops and place guards at different stages of the journey. Fashion faced 2 significant challenges. Firstly, Marie Antoinette insisted on including their closest servants, appropriate clothing, jewelry, and caretakers for the children, expanding the escape group to 13 people instead of 6. This necessitated additional wagons and a total of 136 horses during the whole escape. Secondly, Fashion had to ensure that the royal troops stationed along the escape route did not raise any suspicion, even as they were unaware of whom they were guarding. In the days leading up to the escape, the royal family must maintain an appearance of normal, following their regular routines. Working class attire is discreetly smuggled in to be worn on the fateful day. On the 20th of June, the plan is set in motion. Friendly troops loyal to the royal family will rendezvous with the wagons at various points along the route. The journey will initially take them east, then north toward Luxembourg, where strong royalist forces await. On the day of the escape, Fashion pays a final visit to the royal family, and emotions run high. Fashion, ever devoted to the royal family's safety, desires to travel with them all the way to their ultimate destination. However, King Louis XVI insists that Fashion accompany them only during the most dangerous part of the journey, and then rendezvous at a designated location. King Louis XVI, expressing his gratitude, says, "Monsieur Fashion, whatever happens, I will never forget what you have done for me." Nightfall finally descends upon Paris. Fashion, now disguised as a coach driver, dons a new persona. With 2 guns concealed in his pockets, he waits beside the wagon parked outside his house. Slowly, he begins to roll through the dimly lit Parisian streets where the night conceals their daring escape. Meanwhile, the royal family gathers for their supper, striving to appear calm and unaffected. At 10 o'clock, the queen excuses herself, supposedly returning to her apartment. Instead, she heads straight to the princess' room. The royal children were disguised as girls. The young duke voiced his protests, but Marie Antoinette assured him it's all part of a theatrical act. They descend through the empty apartments until they reach the streets, shrouded in darkness. As they emerge, they spot a figure in the dark. It's Fashion. They quickly load the children into the waiting wagon, and moments later Fashion and the royal children disappears into the night. The queen returns to her apartment, maintaining her facade. At 11 p.m., King Louis XVI concludes his dinner, joined by none other than Lafayette, who reviews the schedule for the next day. Sensing the king's distraction, Lafayette observes him closely. The king retires to his bed, waiting for the tranquility of the night. Silently, he rises, dons his disguise from the crown prince's room, and proceeds to the street-level apartment. In this secret meeting point, the king, according to the plan, meets a loyal soldier who guides him to safety. The soldier, together with another man, had done this walk several times during the last months. Remarkably, the National Guard does not react, having become accustomed to this routine in recent weeks. Oblivious to the unfolding drama, they let the king pass. Meanwhile, Fashion, posing convincingly as a coach driver, keeps the wagon containing the royal children inconspicuous. Fashion returns to pick up the king and queen. Chewing tobacco and seemingly engrossed in checking the carriage, he adeptly diverts attention. Lafayette and a patrol, accompanied by the mayor of Paris, approached him. Fashion instinctively turns his back, feigning a repair. Lafayette passes by without noticing the man in front of him. It is now almost 12 p.m. and the whereabouts of everyone are as follows. Madame Elizabeth, the king's sister, arrives first and joins the passengers. Another hour passes, and after midnight, the king himself appears and boards the wagon. However, the queen is late. They are already behind schedule and running very late. The queen has lost her way, but eventually she joins Fashion and the wagon. And at 10 minutes to 1 on the night of June 21st, they finally begin their journey. However, they are now 1.5 hours behind schedule. After the wagon rolls through the night and the streets of Paris, they make their way towards the larger wagon that will drive them the remaining part of the journey. But when they arrive at the designated location, the big wagon is nowhere in sight. It is not where they had agreed to meet. Fashion disappears into the darkness, leaving the royal family feeling anxious. But Fashion returns with the big wagon. The wagons are now positioned next to each other, and the family jumps into the new wagon without any issues. At 2:20 a.m., they reach Bondy, a suburb of Paris, where the first change of horses take place. At this point, Fashion is no longer allowed to accompany the royal family. The king cannot accept the presence of a foreign man ensuring their safety. Fashion takes another route and rides through the night towards the agreed meeting place at Montmedy. However, the royal wagon never arrives. The poor roads prove too challenging for the heavy wagon, requiring frequent stop for repairs. Hours are lost. The military forces stationed to meet the wagons are present on the agreed upon time, but the king never arrives, causing them to retreat. When the king finally does arrive, there are no guards to greet them. A certain French noble assumes that the escape must have been postponed by another 24 hours and sends messages to all forces behind them to withdraw. At 7 a.m., the king's servants awaken and discover that the king and his family are gone. At this time, the royals are approximately 60 kilometers outside Paris. At 8 a.m., bells ring throughout the city, alerting the entire populace. By 11 a.m., couriers ride in all directions, spreading the news that the king is about 100 kilometers outside Paris. At 8 p.m., the royal wagon reaches a guard post in Saint Menehould. The Revolutionary Guard halts the wagon, and one man scrutinizes both the wagon and its passengers. He seems to recognize someone who bears a striking resemblance to the Queen, whom he had seen several times while serving in the army. However, he allows them to pass. Around an hour later, a courier from Paris reaches the same guard post, and everyone now realizes that it was indeed the Queen they had seen. The royal family reaches the city of Varennes at 10:40 p.m, attempting to find the royal troops but discovering none. At 11:30 p.m, the city's bells toll and the National Guard assembles. The royal family is stopped, and someone who had witnessed the royal couple in Versailles identifies them. They now know they have captured the king. In a nearby tavern, around 60 hussars along with the officers await the commotion outside. Upon hearing the noise, they investigate the situation. Although the 60 soldiers could possibly save the king, they are too afraid to do so. In the meantime, Fersen, who was on his way to Montmedy, found out what had happened. The king had been recognized. The troops hadn't done their job properly, and the mission failed. The royal family was returned to Paris. Fersen wrote to his father saying, "All is lost, my dear father, and I am in despair. The king was stopped at Varennes. Judge of my grief and pity me." A few days after that, Marie Antoinette was able to send a letter to Fersen, saying, "I exist. How uneasy I have been about you, and how I pity you for having no news of us. Heaven grant that this letter may reach you. Do not write to me, that would only expose us. Above all, do not come here under any pretext. It is known that it was you who took us out of here. All would be lost if you appeared here. We are kept in sight, night and day.